Well, okay, again. Good evening to the Matura Express. Obviously, it's English tonight. My name is Karina, and tonight's topic is tolerance. Sorry for that. There seems to be some technical difficulties in terms of the acoustics. Okay. Did I already mention that tonight's topic is tolerance? Yeah, I did. It is a content thing, so I'm gonna tell you a couple of things about tolerance. We're gonna define some terms. I'm gonna talk you through a couple of definitions that you should know that are related to tolerance. There will also be some questions that might be useful for you to think about prior to the exam. Yeah, that's basically it. We start with the definitions straight away. I think tolerance is a good topic for those of you who like definitions, because there's something, something to hold on to. You can learn those things and then you can kind of sound intelligent. I don't know. Okay, here is a definition of stereotypes and prejudice. These are not my definitions. Well, you can basically steal them or whatever. If I were you, I would learn a definition. There's definitions in your books as well. I looked it up today. There's loads of definitions out there on the internet. Maybe you have a look at them and kind of piece together what works best for you. Stereotypes and prejudice are not the same thing, and usually in the topic of tolerance they do come up. A stereotype is a thought that someone has about a specific type of individuals that may or may not accurately reflect reality. I think that is important. In the exams sometimes the question arises if stereotypes are per definition negative. They are not. There is positive stereotypes as well. The standard example is the stereotype that, I don't know, all the Germans are very good at technical stuff, like, building cars and so on and so forth, that they're very accurate, that they're very punctual, and so on and so forth. That will be stereotypes. They are not always negative. There's positive stereotypes as well. Usually we have bad connotations with stereotypes, but they are not always negative. They may or may not reflect reality. They are usually based on something that is sort of true, on an observation of a large group of people. And, well, we then conclude if there's, we then kind of find out patterns about their behavior. They might be true in the base, but they are usually, as my text says, oversimplified. To simplify something, etwas vereinfachen. So they are too simple. They don't reflect the general thing. They are just one idea about people. And they end up distorting the essence of an individual. To distort means verzerren in German, so it is kind of a blurred, a distorted picture of reality, really. So I think the key aspects about the stereotype thing are that they reflect reality, or some of them do, at least to a certain point, but they're simplifications of what the whole thing really is, and they give us a wrong notion about, well, maybe, I don't know, whole country, whatever. Prejudice are usually negative. I've never heard about positive prejudice, really. We have the word unfavorable. Unfavorable is... What is unfavorable in German? Ungünstig, something like that. Anyway, a prejudice is an opinion, usually about one, that was formed before having any evidence, and that is not based on reason or experience. So prejudice are based on feelings, on stuff that we have heard about certain groups of people prior to like our first encounter with them. So prejudice usually have their origin in the idea that there are better people and worse people, that people are not as valuable as other people are. So you have this in my definition. It is rooted in the idea that certain types of people are worth less and are less capable than others. I think you get that as well very frequently about certain groups of people, that they are not as educated as we are, that they don't have as much access to, I don't know, internet books and education as we do, and that they are therefore, well, not as good as we are. So prejudice are usually negative. As I said, I've never heard about a good one, but a good prejudice. And they are not based on reason or experience. Reason in this case is not Grund in German. In this case it's Vernunft. So if we thought about it reasonably, if we thought about it more carefully, we would know that prejudices are wrong, that they don't reflect reality. But we hear so much about certain groups of people, we read so much about certain groups of people that we start to believe it, kind of. Oops. Sorry for that. I just lost my great pen. Okay, capable, you may not know the word. Capable is fähig, so as I said, because of lack of our Western standards of education, this might be a reason for prejudice. Prejudice and stereotypes alike usually lead to discrimination, or can lead to discrimination. So now we are talking about the effects of a lack of tolerance in a society. There's direct and indirect discrimination. I think the two terms are self-explanatory, really. Direct discrimination is if you walk up to a person and discriminate him or her verbally in person into his or her face, basically. Direct discrimination can be pretty much anything that is done face-to-face kind of thing. It can be rude remarks, it can be jokes that are improper at the moment. Direct discrimination can also be, we hear that on the media every now and then nowadays, that people, I don't know, for a job interview, I don't think it is legal in Austria, I have to say that. But in other countries it is allowed to, for example, say no black people should apply for the job. I think in Austria that's forbidden. You would not be, like, you as the employer can't do that. But that would be a case of direct discrimination where a job ad, like the advertisement in the newspaper, directly says that people of color don't have to apply because they won't stand a chance anyway. That would be direct discrimination. Indirect discrimination is if you get the chance for a job interview, but if the company then decides against you on the reason of skin color, religion, gender as well. I think that indirect discrimination can be an issue in the gender and equality thing. So nobody tells you straight to your face that you did not get the job because of your skin color, for example, or because of your age. There's something like age discrimination as well nowadays. But indirect discrimination is you don't get the job, you get discriminated against for some reason, be it for your religious attitudes or whatever. Nobody tells you, so you might not even know that this was the case. You just get a letter of rejection basically saying that you did not get the job. Indirect discrimination would be if the skin color was the reason for you not getting the job. Structural discrimination, I think that's an important point, has to do with public institutions. So structural discrimination is maybe not so much of an issue in Austria, but then as well in housing, in jobs and in schools. Structural discrimination was first mentioned in the context of Great Britain because they're people of a different skin color. There's a lot of immigrants in England from all the different colonies that England had in its very long history. So structural discrimination would be if people of a certain religious background or of a certain skin color, that's usually the reason, don't get access to good housing, that they get rejected by the landlords because the landlords have this idea of not wanting people of color in their house. The same holds true for jobs. Would also be structural discrimination if there was jobs that you don't get on a larger scale, like because company policy is kind of like no people of color. Schools as well. Schools very often discriminate, or it might not be such an issue nowadays, discriminate for religious reasons because it was not a Catholic school or because the people who applied were not Catholics. So that would be structural discrimination if you get discriminated against on a larger scale in housing, in jobs, in schools. Multiple discrimination is a new concept, has not been around for that long. Multiple discrimination is if you get discriminated against for more than 1 point. So the standard example is a woman of color and of a certain age. That is the classic example that I think also your book gives, or is it my book? I can't remember. A book in any case. So a woman who gets discriminated against for being a woman, whether or not the gender gap is still such a big issue is maybe up to you to decide. I don't know. It's probably a separate topic anyway. But if it is then a woman of color in our society, always talking about the European context, and if she has a certain age, then it will probably be very hard for her to find a job. And that is what multiple discrimination is. So you get discriminated against for being a woman, for being black, and for being, I don't know, over 50, I don't know. The push and pull factors are interesting. They are definitely in your book as well. So it's a definition of racism and xenophobia. Xenophobia, the Greek word for, well, includes the word phobia. We all know that this is, xenophobia is the stronger version of racism. Xenophobia is if people are afraid of people from other countries. Afraid in the sense that they, I don't know, take their jobs, introduce their religion and kind of implement their religion in such a way that it will at some point be more important than the religion of the region. So that is xenophobia. A phobia is if you're scared of something, is angst of foreigners. That's what the xeno implies. So xenophobia is a dislike of foreigners that is based on some kind of fear because they are foreigners. That's something unknown their religion, maybe also their looks is something that you're not used to, that you cannot deal with really. So that would be xenophobia, if you're scared. And if this fear then turns into negative feelings. Whereas racism is not necessarily founded on fear. Racism is more like this concept of, well, one group of people being better than the other group of people and being the superiors in social hierarchies. Superior, you may or may not know that word. Superior is, what is superior in German? Überlegen. So one group of people, usually it is white people, who think that they are better than everyone else, and that racism is an appropriate means to show the others that you are superior, that you're worth more, that you know more because you had more education, and so on and so forth. Is there any questions or something?
Well,
because the push and pull factors will take a while.
There are some interesting thoughts on it, and the members of this forum seem to have, or of this conversation, seem to have some interesting thoughts about, but they're not real questions.
Okay.
We're right now discussing about tolerance in our daily life.
Ah, sweet. Oh yeah, that's actually a quite good point, really. As you are discussing, you could also have, as there is some people discussing with Chris to my right-hand side, there will be some, well, because everyday racism is an issue nowadays. It was a term coined quite recently that there is a lot of racism going on. The question is how we can counteract stuff like that. These are some questions that I have heard in Matura exams, as I may have told you already. I probably have, I always do. I have heard a couple of oral exams already. This is something that was usually raised in discussions in different stages of the exams. First question is, can we teach tolerance? How can we become a more tolerant society? Like, any ideas on that? And there is then also a campaign that I would like to introduce, because it basically has, like, the campaign, it is in soccer, obviously, but the campaign has made tolerance a government thing, really. So that would be another point. So if you want, you can include that into your discussions. My picture has moved. Okay. As you may have noticed, computers are not my very strong side. Okay. One thing that you should know, but that's also like kind of worth being studied, because it is a topic that you need for not only for tolerance but in some other topics as well. The push and the pull factors, they definitely are in your book, like in the big one. Push and pull factors are the reasons why people leave a country and why they come to a certain country. Push factors is obviously the leave section. They push you outside the country. That would be, if we take Africa as an example, the push factors would be issues like wars, famine, drought, so extremely dry periods, civil war. I think that's a classic like push factor in some African countries. So push is why you leave. Might also be less severe causes, like war is of course the most severe one, civil wars, as they're going on in Syria at the moment, and so on and so forth. They're of course the most serious reasons. But then a push factor on a less severe scale would also be jobs. If you happen to live in a country where the unemployment is very, very high, then a push factor might be people moving from one country to the next because they know that they have better job opportunities there. A quite recent example would be Ireland. There was a lot of Irish people who left during the economic crisis. Many of them went to England because makes sense for the language and so on and so forth. So one push factor would definitely, or in this case, would have been the high unemployment rate in Ireland. This has changed because the good side or the good thing is that nowadays also housing and stuff got a little cheaper. So people start to come back, but for a while it was definitely a push factor that there was so many unemployed people in Ireland. Pull factors are, well, what's the opposite of leave? Come. Great English is like really high scale vocabulary today. The pull factors are reasons that make people come to a country. So if we take Austria as an example, there's all the benefits that living in Austria has. First of all, it is a quite beautiful country. There's good medical infrastructure, there is good education, stuff like that. So that might be a reason why people come to us. Also jobs, I guess, compared to some other European countries, we are still doing quite well in terms of unemployment, especially for season work and so on and so forth. So pull factors, pull, unseen, that is the reasons why people come. I would, if I were you, I would think about a couple of examples, maybe Austria, maybe also countries like, I don't know, Sweden, Denmark. I think they're quite popular for emigration at the moment because you earn quite a lot of money. The education standards are really high as well. Swedish school system is said to be one of the best ones in the world. So this might be pull factors as well. Also works on the opposite side. Some people go to warmer places. They decide to go to places where there is summer all year round, basically, would also be a pull factor. So you can also go for simple things like climate and so on and so forth. Okay, these are the questions. Once again, they were not meant to have this really weird handwriting in them. That was not the plan. No, I don't want to add anything. I just want, yeah. So, well, yeah. Should we teach tolerance in school? That was, like, I did not come up with the idea. It's been out there for a while. There is this idea to include some lessons on tolerance into maybe not religious education, but the substitute subject that some people take in, what's it called actually? Ethical lesson. Like, what do you call ethic? Well, yeah, that one. You know what I'm talking about? Ethics. Is that the subject? Cool. So, well, yeah, that was an idea, teaching tolerance in school. In such lessons, they don't really know how to do it. Nobody does really, I think. The question is, can it be taught? Should it be taught? Is it the task of the school to teach it? Opponents of the idea say, well, it's the parents' duty, more or less. Schools have enough ground to cover in like subjects like math and English and German and whatever. Well, would be an interesting question maybe for you to think about or for you to ask in your exams as well, as there is a dialogue part. Can it be taught? I don't know. Well, how we can become a more tolerant society, I will go into a little bit more detail in a second. I found a very interesting article about that, or very interesting, but an article. Oops. This is a campaign I was talking about. You may have seen those pictures. They are very famous. The UEFA campaign is not new, like we had that before. There is a couple of very famous football players. Cristiano Ronaldo, we have Neymar, and we have David Luiz, if my soccer skills don't completely fail me. Anyway, 2 Brazilian players, 1 Portuguese player. The UEFA, the chair organization of world football decided to launch a campaign a campaign for tolerance and against racism. They did not invent the whole thing. It was a government thing, so the whole thing was government funded, because it is a big problem in many countries, also in football, especially countries like France and Italy struggle with racism in their leagues. Brazil as well, so that's why there's many Brazilian football players involved in the whole thing. The question is, does it help? Another question is, should we make it a government thing? That's what some people criticize. They have to spend a lot of money on the campaign, because they also outfitted soccer stadiums with those "Say No to Racism" banners and so on and so forth. They calculated extra time before the game when the soccer players ran around with their signs and whatever. They were criticized for that because minutes on television cost money, and it was not used for the actual thing. It was not used for football. But the governments kind of said, well, that's justified. So the question is it useful? Waste of money? Does it help? Does it help if Ronaldo tells us to be a little more tolerant? Could think about that as well. I don't want any Google connection, but thanks. Okay. And, well, the more tolerant society thing, as I said, you can type that into Google, and you'll find a good many probably theoretical tips on how to become more tolerant. I read a couple of articles and I picked a couple of things that I thought were interesting. I think the most important ones, and maybe also the ones that are linked in a certain kind of way, also with what I said in the beginning about the prejudice, is the media example. We know that there's media out there, be it print media, sources on social media and so on and so forth, which would do a lot to, well, bring certain groups of people into disregard, who would try to make negative press against certain groups of people, against certain also political tendencies. So I think it is up to us to decide what to read and what to believe, because irresponsible media, unvernünftige Medienberichte, whatever, definitely foster prejudice. So we only read one side, and this one side is very much geared into a certain, into opinion forming of a certain kind. So we should definitely compare and contrast the media that we have. We have a lot. We have television, we have newspapers, better ones, worse ones. But still, I guess if we compare, and if you don't believe everything that the media say, then, well, it's probably all we can do, really. But irresponsible media and news coverage into certain directions definitely fosters prejudice. Leads to this point, a scapegoat is... What's a scapegoat? Sündenbock, that one. We have this in German as well. I guess this is a tendency that also comes via the consumption of certain types of media. I think that's, well, I think it's a more or less universal thing nowadays, that we have started to blame certain groups of people for all the problems that there are. Be it unemployment, be it violence, be it drugs, there's always, well, this one culprit that we think we have. So we know, or we think that we know, that this person is the scapegoat, and then we blame it on the whole group of people, which would then again turn it into a prejudice or a stereotype. So that's what we should try to avoid. Read up on things and only pass on well-founded information, but not just some vague guessing. Well, probably was this and that group of people who did this and that. All the other points, well, also leads up to the read at the end of the day. We should read different sources, also read different newspapers. Would also be a good idea now that you will be doing your exams in, well, pretty soon. There are some very good newspapers in English as well that give you a certain aspect, a certain viewpoint on things. So reading is a good idea. Also read up things on social media. Just make sure that it's not one-sided. There is this very nice word that we know from sports. Media should be unbiased, unvoreingenommen, I think is what the German one is. So try to find sources that are unbiased and that give you good, trustworthy information. Well, traveling, meeting new people, and seeking diversity in all things, which is a really good point. I think to meet new people and to travel thing is really nice. It's a very nice idea. Basically, the text said that you can counteract intolerance by traveling, by talking to as many people as you can from different backgrounds, from different religions, and so on and so forth. Learn about their attitudes, learn about what they are doing, learn about what they believe in. And that is what is said to be the best remedy against intolerance. I would say I definitely believe that. And yeah, very quickly back to the start. As a quick recap, if I were you, as I said, I would try and find some standing definitions, a definition that works for you about stereotypes and prejudice, because you may, they probably ask you about that in the exam, or they might ask you. Different types of discrimination. Maybe you could also point out that racism and xenophobia are not the same thing. The push and pull factors, revise them in your books. There's a whole list of push and pull factors, some more obvious than others. I guess stuff like war is really obvious. But then there's also reasons like housing and so on and so forth that I mentioned, which are maybe not that obvious. You could also think about examples for each of the points or for each of the arguments. Also, maybe think about whether or not they apply for Austria. I don't know if housing is a reason to come to Austria, so probably not. Houses are nice, but well. Think about the questions as well. Take my UEFA Say No to Racism example as measures against racism that governments take, that sport takes. You can also discuss it, whether or not you think it's successful. And yeah, that was it for tonight, unless there are any questions.
No, there aren't, but there was a very interesting discussion today.
That's very good. I like that. Discussing things is very good. Should you have any questions, let us know. Well, yeah, that was it. Thank you very much and good night.